believe we are live. Welcome once again to Media's live show, episode 35. It's only been a few days, so mm, sorry, I got some brownie in my mouth. Mm. So nothing new to talk about when it comes to like free run and Jujutsu Kaisen. Still haven't made the time to watch Vigilantes, so even though that would be so topical for what I ended up wanting to talk about. No, most of my brain power over the past 3 or 4 days since we did the last stream has been ate up by some discourse, which is a lot of people are already kind of sick of, even though it's only been a couple days. But I haven't really thrown my 2 cents in, and so since I got nothing better to talk about, let's talk about comics, manga, bande dessinée, the print medium, visuals with words on them, word balloons, stuff like that. This all kind of like kicked off because 2 days ago, Jim Lee had an interview where he talked about the strengths of manga versus the American comic book industry. When people talk about the American comic book industry, what they really mean is Marvel and DC, and to a lesser extent, like Image and some of the maybe some of the they might have some Dark Horse comics in mind. Uh, but the point Jim Lee was making was about genre diversity. You know, like so much of the American comic book landscape is dictated by the big two superhero companies, and so oversaturated with that. Even though Marvel also publishes Star Wars, and Star Wars comics are historically just as successful as their superhero stuff. Uh, but even with that, yeah, let's just talk about the genre diversity in American comics because this is a very storied thing that a lot of people aren't really aware of, and it's something that like DC is directly responsible for, and they might be a little too proud to admit it. Even though they are like 100% responsible for it. That's the stuff. So back in the day, and it's still kind of like this, where, and I'll get into like the differences in how the markets work. Uh, a problem with a lot of this discourse is that the people who are opining on it either only read manga, only read American comics, or read both, but their American comic book knowledge hasn't really been updated since 2005. Uh, that's kind of the boat I'm in. I'm trying to, like, at least with DC, I'm trying to, like, get back into the swing of things. Because I think DC's in a much better place than Marvel is right now. And I kind of want to reward them for that. You know, I kind of want to reward them for, having the attempt be made. Whereas, like, I haven't been a fan of any of Marvel's major decisions since like 2008. Like it's been that like I like Chip Starsky's Daredevil. I like Spider-Man Life Story. Like there's individual comic book storylines and runs since 2008 that I've moderately enjoyed. But in the broad strokes, when it comes to like the direction of the company, I haven't really liked anything Marvel has done since Superior Spider-Man. Like Superior Spider-Man was the last time I was like, "Wow, man, I'm glad I'm a Marvel fan." And you know that was what was that 2008 was when that storyline came out. Superior. Could be a lot of dates in this, so a lot of fact checking. Oh no, it was 2013. 2013, 2014. What was 2008 Spider-Man? Dan Slott was a writer for Spider-Man for a long time. That's why I kind of had it in my head, because that's the storyline that Dan Slott will like always be known for. And so I always kind of figured it was early on in his run, and I know his run started like 2007, 2008. Unless I'm completely misremembering that. Could be that. Like I said last time, a lot of my comic book knowledge, at least when it comes to Marvel and DC, stems from reading encyclopedias and like data books and wikis and stuff. Because I never really had the disposable income and access to comic book stores to like experience the stuff in real time. And as a 90s kid, there was already so much stuff there, so much continuity there, especially on like the Marvel end. It's something I'm starting to build back. I'm collecting my digital copies of Captain America. I want to have every single Captain America issue at least on digital, and then I'll buy some physical copies of the storylines I really like. Like I want to get Volume 3, I want to get Winter Soldier, I want to get the Steve Englehart run. I want to get that on physical. If I really like something, I'll buy it twice. I'll have digital to check it out, and then if I really like it, I'll buy physical. On top of that, but back to genre diversity. DC is to blame, and so you go back to the 40s. I've read a lot of 40s comics. I have every single Captain America comic from the 40s again on digital. I'm gonna get Volume 1 on physical when I find it on sale. It's worth having. But I've read a lot of that. I've read some 40s Batman. I've read some 40s Superman. I've even read some 40s JSA. But I've also read 40s like Tales from the Warfront. Weird Tales? Marvel's Weird Tales, which is what spun out of Captain America. Like, Captain America, I think I've said this before, like, Captain America was originally envisioned as a horror book. Like, it wasn't originally intended to be, like, a superhero, at least not in the same way that Superman is a superhero. He was a counter spy. He was, psychological thriller. Well, not the psychological thriller, just a regular thriller. But yeah, Timely Comics, who published Captain America, Timely Comics is the company that would later on become Marvel Comics. They did a couple superhero stuff in the 40s. They did Human Torch and Namor and obviously Captain America. But they're mostly known for like monsters, horror, romance, war stories. Then you also had comics that were like epic fantasy stuff. And the big one, comedy. Mickey Mouse, Peanuts, Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes, Bugle Bailey, Dilbert. Like that was a big part of the market share. And these comics were owned by newspaper and magazine publishers. That's who are publishing these comic books throughout the 30s, 40s, and it's still that way today. And at least in like France and again, it's a little more complex. It's not really constructive to paint these things in broad strokes, which is why I didn't title this video Manga versus Comics. I titled it Manga versus Marvel versus DC. Because Bande Dessinée, Calvin and Hobbes, stuff like that, that's not really part of this conversation. And when we talk about mangas, they're not really part of the conversation either. Like it's mostly like just the big shonen that people are talking about. But throughout the 40s and 50s, you had immense amount of genre diversity. Stan Lee got his start writing romance stuff, rom-coms, romantic dramas. Jack Kirby was drawing like horror books. The Hulk was originally intended, again, to be a monster book. He wasn't really intended to be a superhero. He just happened to exist in a world with superheroes in it. And then developed into like a hero and anti-hero and Sometimes he's a villain, depending on who's in charge. Sometimes, some Hulk writers really lean into the monster movie stuff. Uh, but that genre diversity kind of died out in the 50s because of a book with some quack science in it called Seduction of the Innocent, which slandered the comic book medium. It was like, oh, this stuff is all manipulating kids into worshiping the devil and leading debaucherous lifestyles. This is where a lot of the accusations, like Batman and Robin having like homosexual relationships and how is deteriorating America's moral fabric, and the comic book industry overreacted because the way they reacted was creating the Comics Code Authority, the CCA, a self-censorship body where they could like choose what does and doesn't get published based on a list of very strict criteria. And at the time, DC, they had the largest market share on the American comic book industry, and so they got to dictate a lot of these rules, and they manipulated these rules in order to try to put their competitors, namely Timely Comics, out of business. Which is hilarious because of what happened from that, which I'll get to in just a minute. But yeah, all that was like a massive overreaction on the comic book industry's part, and it killed horror books, romance books, and so now we're at a point where like if Marvel and DC want to do anything like that, they have to do it within the context of a superhero. No, you can't just have a straight up monster book now. You have to have a monster book where the monster has to fight a superhero. Like Tomb of Dracula is a popular one from the 70s where it was Dracula's the main character and it's a horror book, but the hero is Blade. That's where Blade got his start. Doctor Strange is, the epic fantasy stuff. He's a sorcerer who's also a superhero. Fantastic Four is basically like superhero adventure sitcom. The Spider-Man was all about like the teeny bopper. The Spider-Man was basically Archie with superpowers. Like anyone who has read Archie and read Spider-Man knows about like the whole fact that Stan Lee was absolutely ripping off Archie, Betty, and Veronica when he was writing Peter, Gwen, and Mary Jane. But it's hilarious that the Comics Code Authority is why we got Marvel Comics. DC was so desperate to put Timely, and then later on they changed their name to Atlas, but put them out of business and take them off the table, that same company reevaluated, restructured, got new leadership, poached a bunch of talent from across the aisle, and rebranded themselves Marvel Comics, and then proceeded to beat DC hand over foot for the next 60 years. Another piece of discourse is that, like, top 10 best comics of the month or best selling comics of the year so far list came out. Year's young, doesn't matter. Like, the sales figures are so low for everyone that, like, it doesn't even really register. But people are making fun of the fact that Marvel only has one book that's in the top 10, and it's one of the crossovers they just did with DC. It's Deadpool Batman is in the top 10 best-selling comics of the year or whatever. And everything else is like either Batman related or Absolute Universe related or both. Uh, but yeah, like even the name Marvel Comics is a play off of Marvel Comics #1, which was published by Timely Comics, and it was what introduced the Human Torch. It was that company's first foray into the superhero genre. But yeah, the superheroes were born from a lot of censorship and a lot of pearl clutching from Puritans who didn't want their kids to read hot, steamy romance or gory monster books. I do think that the genre diversity of manga is often overstated. It is only diverse when you are comparing it to Marvel and DC, because a lot of it is shown in slop. And I say that so I'm literally wearing a Kakashi hoodie. I was literally wearing a Superman hoodie in my last live show. Like, I'm a fan of both of these things, uh, which is why I think that my opinion can be valuable to those who might not know the history, might not know what's going on, might not know the discourse. I'm someone who knows a decent amount of all sides of this equation because I'm a fan of all these things. Uh, but I do think the genre diversity of manga is vastly overstated. So much of it is just action, and the stuff that isn't action is rom coms. It's very rare for a manga to be successful without having either a lot of action or a lot of romantic teasing. Uh, you'll get the occasional horror mangaka, like anything by Junji Ito. You'll occasionally get like a straight up fantasy like Frieren, but even like other isekai, isekai is a big genre, not necessarily in manga, but in anime and light novels and stuff. Different industry, but they're all kind of like intertwined, especially when it comes to like the American mindset. From the American perspective, manga, anime, light novels, they're all like one and the same. Uh, but even though like it's got a lot of action, it's got a lot of romance. Like those are the only two things that manga does consistently. Not just consistently well, just consistently at all. Uh, so I don't think the genre diversity is really what's helping manga. Despite what Jim Lee said, like Jim Lee has a point that at least when it comes to like he's the president of DC now, and he's also worked with Marvel. Like he got to start as a superstar artist for Marvel back in the late '80s. He was a founder and key member of Image Comics throughout the '90s. Then he went to DC and was like a writer or artist for hire for a while before he kind of like rose up to the ranks of DC and became its president. So he's got a point there. And it's something he could probably fix if he'd like brought back Vertigo, which I think they are. I think they are bringing back Vertigo. But like, get other writers, get other books. Have stuff that's not connected to DC in any way. Get things that aren't superhero. Publish the DC Comics. They're connected to Warner Brothers. They could do a comic book adaptation of Harry Potter. They could do a Scooby Doo comic book series. What else is owned by like Warner Brothers? Ruby falls too much into the Ruby is owned by Viz now, so that's not a viable option. They can get the rights to some other like a European project and help publish like the English translation version of something from the Franco-Belgian market. They can probably do, The Shadow is, again, kind of superhero adjacent, but you kind of catch my drift that they could, if they, like, really put belt to ass, they could very well start publishing other stuff from other... A comic book adaptation of Lord of the Rings would slap. They could do that. Like, DC could publish an official, like, Lord of the Rings comic book adaptation. Just like Marvel could very easily do an official comic book adaptation of Star Wars. And Marvel just hasn't been interested in doing that. They just keep doing these side stories that are all like the same three plot lines over and over and over and over again. But the main strength of manga is that it is easily accessible and easily approachable. Uh, and that's something that's like very obvious. It's the first thing that everyone says. If you want to get into One Piece, how do you get into One Piece? You start with chapter 1. There's only One Piece chapter 1. And it goes from chapter 1 to chapter 2, 3, 4, all the way up to like, what chapter are we on? Like 1167? right? What chapter? I don't ever really pay attention to the chapter numbers when uh where's my thing? Just type in latest One Piece chapter. 1171 is the latest One Piece chapter in counting. And when you look at like just the raw numbers, there's not any less One Piece chapters than there are like Captain America comics. Like last time I checked, Captain America was on like legacy number 700, like overall. And did I tweet this? I did not. Sorry. On tonight's live show. All right. So yeah, genre diversity manga is vastly overstated. Manga is easily accessible, and each thing like is in its own world. Like even if you get like sequel series or spin-offs or something, it's all like pretty self-contained. Like if you want to read One Piece, you just read One Piece. You don't have to read Naruto to understand One Piece. Uh, that's not necessarily the case with DC, and it's certainly not the case with Marvel. Uh, Marvel. I have this as a point later on in my little docket, but Marvel is like really strong about having their interconnected universe and having everything tied together almost to its detriment. And I'll provide an example when I get to that part of my bullet points here. Uh, but that's the approachable angle. It's also accessible. Like it's easier to find manga. It's easier to find One Piece chapter one. It's easier to find websites that have every One Piece chapter available. Even if you have to, even if you want to pay for it, like it's easy to find, easy to access, easy to get a hold of. Whereas like it's pretty difficult. Not as difficult now as it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, but it's still pretty difficult to even parse out like, okay, which Captain America one should I start with and where do I even find it? Because there are at least five different Captain America number ones. There's the one from 1941. Uh, there's not one from the 60s because for whatever reason when they relaunched Captain America in the 60s, they started with issue 100. Even though that doesn't make any sense because there's there's not. There were like 70 something, like 78, 79 issues of Captain America. Uh, if you include both the 1940s and the very short-lived Comic Crusher saga, but then you also have Tales of Suspense. Tales of Suspense ran for 99 issues before it spun out into Captain America, but Captain America only showed up in like 40 of those Tales of Suspense issues. So they just like I never really understood the logic with having Captain America Volume 2 start with Captain America issue 100. Because it's just not. They should have just started with one. But then you also have Captain America #1 for 1998 by Mark Waid. That's Volume 3. That was actually my entry point to Captain America. Then you had Volume 4, which was under the Marvel Knights imprint. Haven't read it, can't really make a judgment. Captain America Volume 5, that was the start of Brubaker's run. That's what kicked off the Winter Soldier saga. And then there was another one where when Sam Wilson took over, they relaunched the book with another Captain America #1. And they might have had like 2 or 3 other ones since then. Uh, I just haven't been following Captain America that closely. Like I know some of the writers that they've had. I know some of the plot points that they've had. Like I know that they try and make Red Skull Jordan Peterson knockoff, which is so fucking stupid. We'll get to that, I promise. Uh, and I think the new run with Chip Starsky, which I kind of commented on the other day, is just it's the worst. It's the worst thing. It's the worst thing Chip Starsky's ever done. Uh, but on top of that, on top of manga being more easily accessible, more easily approachable, it's also easier to adapt because I find that manga tends to be made with anime in mind, and I wonder if part of this doesn't really make any sense for this to be part of it, but at the same time, it's the only thing I can think of that makes any kind of sense, which is that comic books are kind of an antiquated art form. Like they are originally published by magazine, so they're on that like monthly format. Having a couple storylines or a single storyline come out once a month. Uh, at a time when television didn't really exist. Like you had theaters, like you had theatrical cartoons, you had like the Superman stuff, Superman serials, or Superman the Max Fleischer cartoon, but you didn't have like television shows in the 30s and 40s because you didn't have televisions back then. Uh, Whereas the first anime came out in like the 50s. The first manga, first Japanese comic book that is noteworthy at all came out in the 50s. Televisions were a thing back by then. And so they were kind of written more with like the adaptations in mind. And I find that the relationship between manga publishers and anime studios tends to be much more cohesive. Like they tend to be more on the same page and tend to be have like a better, more cohesive working relationship than say like Warner Brothers Studios and DC Comics. Uh, and part of like kind of the evidence of this is that manga getting adapted to anime tends to be pretty 1-to-1. Like they'll manipulate some stuff. They'll change some stuff. They'll add extra scenes or add extra dialogue, add extra action bits. Maybe shuffle some things around. Cut a scene out here and replace it over here. Uh, Maybe cut entire plot lines out sometimes. Especially if it's something that's very episodic. Something that has like a lot of bonus material or bonus chapters. They'll play around with that. But for the most part, it's pretty 1-to-1 adaptation. You'll never get a 1-to-1 adaptation of a comic book. You never will. Comic books are too long. They've been around too long. They're too interconnected, and so what a lot of times what happens is that they'll uh, condense and distill what they're adapting. And kind of like highlight this, I kind of brainstormed just a little bit. I spent like an hour brainstorming for Batman, like a Batman animated series where you don't have to worry about the cast aging out. You can have each season be like a year in the life of Batman. So season one, obviously, Batman Year One. It's easy. It's like the definitive origin story for Batman. But it was also written in the 80s. So it's got a lot of like 80s ideals. Like you would have to, if you want to update it for like modern audiences, you would have to change it. Because it's not really like, even though the plot beats and the character arc and stuff is coherent with pretty much any version of Batman. Uh, you have to kind of like find an essence. Otherwise, you're gonna be, you'll end up making the world incohesive if you try to do like one to one, because every artist puts their own spin on Gotham. Every artist puts their own spin on Batman's costume. Every artist puts their own spin on Robin's costume. You kind of have to like pick a lane. Otherwise, it's just a mess. But with this like proposed series, uh, I'm not gonna go through the whole thing, but season two, you build up the Joker. You make him the main villain of season two. He works well as a season two villain. Season three, you build up like the relationship between Dick Grayson and Bruce Wayne. Season three would be the introduction of Robin and stuff. Season four, you do a lot more stuff with the Justice League. Year four is when Batman founds the Justice League, meets Superman. You do like the world's finest stuff, the Injustice Gang. Uh, Season five, that's when you start adapting like the Denny O'Neil stuff from the '70s. You introduce like the League of Assassins, uh, and have like maybe you have the Teen Titans. Robin joining the Teen Titans around that time. Season six, um, you focus more on like Batgirl. Bring Barbara Gordon into it, so that as you go through season nine, that's when you would have like Jason Todd. You would have a whole season with like Jason Todd. Uh, you can have him either introduced in season eight or season nine, but season nine would end with like Death in the Family. Season 10 would introduce Tim Drake. Now, before I even go any further, like what I have written down here, like season 10, Tim Drake, season 11, Nightfall, season 12, No Man's Land, season 13, Fugitive, season 14, Red Hood, season 15, the introduction, Damian Wayne. What studio would possibly ever give a company or give a creative team the green light to spend 15 years on a Batman show before they even introduce Damian Wayne? But you have to if you really want to build up to it. But they would never allow that. Like the TV production pipeline in America is so vastly different from what it's like in Japan. Like you would never be able to get that approved. You would never be able to get that amount of time. You'd be lucky to get past the season two with the way things are. Like you never have that kind of like dedication from an American studio. So it's a lot harder. Like you'll never get something like One Piece. Not unless it's made for super freaking cheap. Unless it's something that's both like super cheap and super popular, like The Simpsons. That's the only way you're gonna get a show that lasts more than 2 seasons or more than 5 seasons. Which is why like and, and and this is like an important thing, like because Bane's a much more like relatively recent creation for Batman. He was introduced in the '90s. Uh, so no matter what you how you slice it, like Batman's been Batman for a long time before he runs into Bane. But again, like Bane's such a popular character, they would never have the restraint to do that. They would never have the restraint to build up to him the way that the comics kind of did. You couldn't even get Warner Brothers wouldn't even get through a second movie with Superman in it before they jumped the gun on Doomsday. Like they literally went from Man of Steel to, hey, let's kill off Superman. Even though that was like 60 years in the making in the comics, 2 years is, 2 movies is all it took for Warner Brothers to be like, we're out of ideas, let's do Doomsday. But that's why, you tend to, and that's part of the problem, like, I've mentioned this before, like the ubiquitous stories make the build up to those stories impossible. Like, I talk a lot about Captain America because he's my favorite superhero. My favorite superhero is and always will be Captain America. I love the Winter Soldier storyline. I love Ed Brubaker's run. Ed Brubaker, his Captain America is arguably the greatest run of Captain America ever. He turned Captain America from like a pretty cool niche hero to like a must read on every comic book fan's list. Like everyone loves Ed Brubaker's Captain America. His Captain America ruined any future adaptations of Captain America because part of the drama of the Winter Soldier storyline is that Bucky was dead. He was dead. He was dead at a time when Marvel was like, dead means dead. Like, Marvel in the 60s, they said, we're not going to be like DC. We're not going to keep doing these fake out and temporary character killing bullshit. That was something DC was already notorious for as early as the 60s. Marvel was like, no, when we kill off a character and we show a body, that character stays dead. And they stuck with that up until the 90s. They only broke that because Spider-Man's Clone Saga got so out of hand and they just lost complete control over their own plot that they were like, only way we could tie this up is if we bring Green Goblin back. Green Goblin died in the 70s. He died right before the original Clone storyline in the 70s. Died at the end of the death of Gwen Stacy, impaled by his own glider. And he was like dead. And Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, like stayed dead. Like, yeah, you had Hobgoblin after that, and you had Harry Osborn becoming the Green Goblin for off and on throughout the late 80s, early 90s. But Norman Osborn was dead for 20 years. For over 20 years of publication, there was no Norman Osborn showing up in the mainline 616 universe. And then he did. Because Clone Saga needed a secret supervillain reveal. And they were out of ideas. But even then, they're like, okay, there are 3 characters that we are never going to bring back. We're never going to bring back Gwen Stacy. We're never going to bring back Uncle Ben. And we're never going to bring back Bucky Barnes. Because so much of the drama with Captain America's comics was that Bucky was dead. He died in the 1940s. He died to Baron Zemo due to Baron Zemo's machinations. And Steve Rogers is very guilty about it, has a lot of PTSD about it. And his main storyline throughout the first 450 issues of Captain America comics is, well, not really, more like 350 because again, like issue 100, it starts with issue 100 for some reason, but from like issue 100 all the way through the end of volume 2 up through the end of volume 3 with the Dan Jurgens run, Captain America was guilty over Bucky's death, and big thing Dan Jurgens did was finally give Cap closure. Finally give him closure. Finally, like, give him a hero's funeral the way that Bucky always deserved. 3 years. It was 3 years later that Bucky came back. And only one of those years did Captain America have a comic book out. Because at the end of Captain America Volume 3, he does the funeral for Bucky. Then you get issue 50, where Captain America dies and gets his own superhero funeral because Dan Jurgens really, really, really wanted to do another Death of Superman. I think it's funny that Marvel was like, hey, we want to give the same treatment to Captain America that DC did with Superman a decade earlier, and they hired literally the same guy who did the Death of Superman, Dan Jurgens. And he did it the exact same way. I mean, hey, self-plagiarism is style, am I right? And that was like a good send-off to Captain America, and I'll kind of get into that because there's something to be said about that. But that was right after 9/11 happened, so they kind of like shelved Captain America for a while. It brought him back in late 2003, early 2004. That's the run I haven't read. That was Marvel Knight's run. Heard good things. I'm excited to finally get there. But then they kind of like shelved him again after that for a few months before bringing him back in 2005. But Winter Soldier is so ubiquitous and such an iconic story and such a story that like everyone knows. Everyone fucking loves Bucky. And it's so ubiquitous that you would never, ever get a Captain America adaptation where they spend more than a season and a half before jumping the gun on Winter Soldier. All the drama, all the fake outs, all the like PTSD stuff, Rick Jones being Bucky, uh, Jack Monroe being Bucky, the lonesome death of Jack Monroe. It's just such a fucking downer of a story. That was another Ed Brubaker storyline, right in the middle of the Winter Soldier saga. But the whole like sad case of Jack Monroe leading up to that, his strange relationship with the Falcon, and being like, no, I can't have a sidekick. I'm not allowed to have a partner. I need someone who can actually like keep up. I need someone who I don't feel responsible for. That's a big part of him and Falcon's relationship. Is that Falcon isn't a sidekick. Uh, like all that drama, all that characterization, all that development, and then the Winter Soldier storyline. But you can't get that. You can't get that anymore. Winter Soldier storyline is too popular. Like they used it in Avengers Earth Mightiest Hero season 2. They used it in Avengers Assemble. I think they also did that in season 2 of that show. It might have even been season 1. It's the second Captain America live action movie, which means it's the third film appearance of Chris Evans' Captain America. Like it's just it's inescapable, and you never get that build up. The kind of build up that kind of I wouldn't say deserves, but like it'll never hit as hard as it did in the comics because you don't have that decades and decades worth of storyline building up to it. Uh Now part of the solution that a lot of these superhero cartoons do is that they jump into an established world. They'll pick a time period and go from there. Batman the Animated Series. Batman is still relatively new. Like, he hasn't had a run-in with a lot of his popular villains. Like, he's had run-ins with Penguin and Joker. And I think that's it. Because we see Two-Face's origin. We see Mr. Freeze's origin. We see Poison Ivy's origin. We see his first interaction with Scarecrow. His first interaction with Man-Bat. His first interaction with Bane. Killer Croc, I think, is established already by the time Batman the Animated Series starts. But yeah, I think that's it. I think it's just Penguin, Joker, and Killer Croc are the only ones that are like established supervillains by the time Batman the Animated Series begins. But you have Dick Grayson as Robin, but it's like college years Robin, so he's kind of like on his way out, and he's only Robin's. He's only with Batman sometimes in some episodes throughout the first 3 seasons, first 3 volumes. Uh, and then they completely they had to skip over Jason Todd. We'll get to that later. Uh, no, Young Justice is another one. That's another popular one, and I think Young Justice probably is my favorite adaptation when it comes to like trying to encompass the entire DC mythos. I think it does a better job than Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, even though I like Justice League and Justice League Unlimited more. I think those are better shows. They have a lot better focus, a lot better pacing, a lot better storylines, but there is something missing from those, and that's one, Justice League wasn't allowed to use any of the sidekicks. It wasn't allowed to interact with anything that could possibly be connected to Teen Titans. And I think that is bullshit. I think that was a very bad mistake on both their part and also on Teen Titans' part. I think it ended up crippling both of those shows in the dramatic way they could have had. It especially doesn't make sense because Batgirl, Nightwing, and Robin were already established in that universe, as was Kyle Rayner. Like, Kyle Rayner, the Green Lantern, he shows up in an episode of Superman the Animated Series. Superman helps him fight Sinestro, and we get his whole origin story in an episode of Superman. Even though they totally combined Kyle Rayner with Hal Jordan and made it into one character. Kind of weird. But then they just never use him again. Like he never shows up in Justice League, never shows up in Justice League Unlimited. Uh, it's just John Stewart and I think Guy Gardner has like a few appearances. Uh, but Justice League is kind of a weird case because they also have Wally West be the only Flash. Like they never mention Barry Allen. And again, they also never mention Hal Jordan. They have Aquaman, but it's like '90s Aquaman where he had the fishhook hand. Uh, kind of warped my perception of like what Aquaman is supposed to be for a long time. Because they really took this like very niche time period of Aquaman and made that the only time period for Aquaman in their world. Uh, Again, kind of weird. And the other thing that Justice League wasn't allowed to touch was Batman villains. There was some like rights issues with the Batman villains. Like they could use Batman. They were allowed to use Joker for one cameo in one episode, but they weren't allowed to use any of Batman's other rogues or his other supporting cast. And I think that was to Justice League's detriment overall. Uh, but then even Young Justice, which I think does a much better broad way of doing that by putting the focus on the sidekicks, which is cool. And again, like sidekicks are something that DC has that Marvel doesn't. Like that's one of the big differences between DC and Marvel. Uh, but even that, like, you get the bare bones of like what's happened in the past. Like by the time that season 1 of Young Justice starts, Batman has been Batman for about 8 years because he was Batman for about 3 years when he met Dick Grayson, and Dick Grayson's been Robin for about 5 years by the start of Young Justice season 1. And then you got the 5 year time skip, and by that 5 year time skip, you have Barbara Gordon established as Batgirl, Jason Todd is dead, Tim Drake is Robin number 3, Dick Grayson is Nightwing. Go from there. Season 3 takes place 2 years later, and you have like Spoiler and Orphan as part of the gang at that point. Season 4, I think, is just 1 year later, and so the Batman like status quo hasn't really changed since season 3. You do have like Jason Todd is back as the Red Hooded Ninja. I'm not done with season 4. I'm only like 4 or 5 episodes in, but it's definitely Jason Todd. And you have like Talia holding what is definitely a young Damian Wayne, like a young like 4 or 5 year old Damian Wayne. Which means that we're another 5 year time skip away from Damian Wayne becoming Robin if it's like the comics where he becomes Robin when he's 10. But yeah, that's jumping into an established world and then also like doing time skips and having you try to like fill in the gaps with your own knowledge of the comics, but that doesn't really work because the worlds are different. Like Arkham Asylum is actually really bad about this. The Arkham games are really bad about this, especially Arkham Asylum, because Arkham Asylum treats itself as if, okay, this is Batman circa 2004, and we're going from there. Or it's Batman the Animated Series. Like, it really, like, roots itself in the continuity of Batman the Animated Series. Like, okay, Batman has established relationships with all these villains and knows all the stuff about all these villains that you get alluded to through the Riddler trophies and stuff. And they are very much their animated series designs. But then they retcon it in the future games. Like there's a Riddler trophy or Riddler puzzle for Hugo Strange that gives like Hugo Strange, he figured out Batman's identity, tries to learn the highest bidder, blah 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 blah. But then in Arkham City, it's like Batman and Hugo Strange have never clashed. Uh, in Arkham Asylum, Bane like picks up Batman, is like, this, I will break you again, or something like that. And Batman's like, no, this time, Bane, I break you. Obvious allusion to Nightfall, the Nightfall saga. That Bane's big story arc, his only real story arc. Kind of crazy considering that he's the one who killed Alfred in 2019. But still, like, the thing that Bane is most known for is being the guy who breaks Batman's back. He never broke Batman's back in Batman the Animated Series. And he never actually broke Batman's back in the Marvel or in the Arkham series either. He only breaks his back in the comics. But it's like they want you to try to fill in the blanks with your comic book knowledge. Everyone knows that Bane breaks Batman's back, so it's like, okay, at some point Bane broke Batman's back. No. Because they kind of retconned that. They jumped into an established world, tried to have you fill in the blanks, and then went against what you would naturally fill those blanks in with. Same thing with, like, Azrael. Azrael is a huge part of the Nightfall saga. But he's introduced in Arkham City like Batman has never heard of the Order of St. Dumas. Conclusion is that Nightfall, the comic book storyline, is not canon to the Arkhamverse, nor should it be at this point. But then it's like, what was Batman and Bane referring to? Because obviously, like, Nightfall or something like Nightfall happened, just not the way that it happened in the comics. And you can't use Origins as the example either, because that's not really lining up with the way that Bane is portrayed in Arkham Asylum, at least as far as, like, his character profile goes, and the way that, or the This Time I Break You, like, Bane never broke Batman in Arkham Origins either. Very confusing. It's very confusing to try to, like, parse all this out. That's actually a good time as I need to bring up the continuity thing. DC's flaw became its strength. DC has never really cared about their continuity. They've always had a problem with it. When they relaunched their whole line of books in 1955, kicking off the Silver Age, they treated it as a new world with a brand new Flash, Barry Allen, brand new Green Lantern, Hal Jordan. But then when it came to Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, it was like, no, this is the same. This is the same Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman that you've been following since the 40s. You know, they're probably we're not messing with any of that stuff. So all that stuff happened, but it also didn't because Superman was a member of the JSA, along with Jay Garrick and Alan Scott, Hawkman, the other 40s superheroes. So, like, they try to have their cake and eat it too, and then they keep doing that. Like, people be like, oh, DC's rebooted their universe like 15 times. Like, no, they've actually never done a full-on reboot. They've always half-assed it. Crisis on Infinite Earths was supposed to be the fresh start. We're burning the multiverse down, and we're starting back at issue number 1 for all these characters, but we really want to keep Judas Contract canon? We really want to keep Denny O'Neil's run on Batman canon? So we're going to be like, Batman's been around for about 5 to 10 years. We're starting back at number 1, but Batman's already established and already has Jason Todd as Robin, and Dick Grayson's already Nightwing, and Catwoman's like an anti-hero now. We're the Batgirl, Barbara Gordon's Batgirl already, and we're going from there. We're going from there. Fresh start, but not really. And then they did it again with Flashpoint. When Flashpoint happened, the whole universe reset. New 52, new Superman, new Wonder Woman, new Green Lantern, new Hal Jordan, new Barry Allen. Cyborg's a founding member of the Justice League now for some reason. Even though he was originally a Titan. We gotta have that diversity quota. But then when it came to Batman, I'm like, really liked Grant Morrison. Scott Snyder was in charge of bringing Batman into the New 52. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna kind of just ignore the whole New 52 thing and just pick up right where Grant Morrison left off. So New 52 was like, Batman's only been Batman for 5 years. And Scott Snyder, who was writing Batman, was like, yeah, he's already on Damian Wayne. He's already on Robin number 4 and Batgirl number 3. So, like, Dick Grayson's Robin, Jason's Red Hood, Tim Drake is Red Robin, Damian Wayne is actual Robin, Cassandra Cain is somewhere, Stephanie Brown is around, Barbara Gordon's Oracle, but she's also Batgirl again because they really wanted to have a Batgirl book with Barbara Gordon as in the starring role. and they gave her like a chip on her spine to help her walk again. Such a stupid decision. I much prefer Barbara Gordon as Oracle, and that's not just because I'm a huge fan of Cassandra Cain as Batgirl. But like, yeah, they half-assed that reboot. Like they didn't reboot They never rebooted Batman. They just kept everything. It was like, yeah, everything has happened, just maybe not the way you read it. Nightfall's still canon. Somehow Batman went from having, well, year one isn't canon. For some reason, they made year one the one and only Batman book that isn't canon anymore. For New 52. But then with Rebirth, like, okay, no, that's canon again, and Zero Year is not canon because Zero Year sucks, and no one likes it because Tom King's Batman sucks. But yeah, they kind of like, you know, people don't really read or pay attention to DC. They don't even read or pay attention to Batman when they say that DC is constantly rebooting their series. Like, no, not really. Uh, uh, but they've been making those same mistakes for so long that it's actually turned into a strength. They've been the villain so long that they became the hero. Because now it's like, fuck it. We ball. You like Cassandra Cain? Here's Cassandra Cain 2024. We're going to reference her 2000 run. We're going to reference the Robin 1 year later storyline. We're going to reference to the retcon to Robin 1 year later, where it turned out Cassandra Cain and Bronze Tiger were being brainwashed. But like everything else, she'll make mention that she went by orphan for a bit. She'll make mention that she was in Hong Kong for a bit. You know, Batman Incorporated. We'll tip our hat to that. But like, we're not going to reference the fact that Dick Grayson was Batman. We don't care about that. We're not going to reference the fact that Cassandra Cain dated Superboy for a minute. We're not about that. You know, we're not going to. The only thing that's canon is the stuff that we like. DC is very pro headcanon. Very pro, like what you want to like and treat that as part of your canon. If you don't like a storyline, just ignore it. Fuck it, we ball. Roll with the punches, man. None of it matters anyway. It's all just stupid comic books. Uh, it's all just cape shit. And again, like, this is something that DC's kind of always done. It's just gotten to a point where, like, it's fun. That, like, they made it fun again. Instead of frustrating like it used to be. Like, very famous story from the 70s. Denny O'Neil took over Green Lantern, brought Oliver Queen, aka Green Arrow, into it because no one was using Oliver Queen. So created the hard traveling hero saga where Green Lantern and Green Arrow traveled around the country solving domestic problems. Very famous issue of that is Speedy getting hooked on heroin. And Denny O'Neil made that executive decision himself because he was given carte blanche, given free reign to do whatever he wanted with that book. And he used Speedy without consulting with the guy who was writing Teen Titans. And the guy who was writing Teen Titans got really upset because he was like, man, if I would have known Denny O'Neil was going to do that, I would have like built up to it because that's what Marvel does. And Marvel's been doing that so long and so well that it became a problem. Marvel was a hero for long enough to where they became a villain. Because now, it's impossible to get into Spider-Man without addressing the Clone Saga. It's impossible to get into Spider-Man without addressing One More Day. It's impossible to get into Spider-Man without addressing Paul. Like, Spider-Man has some problems. Spider-Man has some story arcs that ruin Spider-Man forever. And that's all canon. And you can't just undo that. You can't just be like, Spider-Man was brainwashed when he made a deal with Mephisto. No, it's too late. You can't salvage him the same way that DC was able to salvage Batman or salvage Cassandra Cain or salvage Barry Allen. Or salvage Hal Jordan. You can't. It's too intertwined. It's too interconnected. It's too much influenced by itself. Like, all roads lead to and stem from One More Day. All roads lead to and stem from the Clone Saga. All roads lead to and stem from Zeb Wells' run. Like, you can't escape it. The only way you can enjoy 616 Spider-Man is if you start with the 60s and you stop before the 90s. Because once you get into the 90s, that's when you start getting bullshit like Maximum Carnage and the Clone Saga. And then you get into the 2000s, you just get characters like Morlun and the Spider Totem and all the weird bullshit synergy that they tried to do with the movies where Spider-Man gets organic webbing. Because that's what it is in the movies. The synergy thing, Marvel has been more wanting to. Well, I don't know which one is worse about it. Because on one hand, I think Marvel has done it more, where they have tried to synergize with the movies and try to like be more like the movies. You know, I'm thinking about like the Ultimate X-Men comics, using the movie outfits, or Straczynski Spider-Man having the organic webbing. But at the same time, I know about Wallace West, the other Kid Flash, because when New 52 happened, the Flash CW show was going on. And in that, they made Wally West black. You know, a very early example of taking a ginger character and making him black for diversity hire sake. And people were against that. Like, okay, sure, whatever, fine. It's fine in the TV show. But you can't be like, everything is canon. You can't be like Grant Morrison, everything is canon. And then have Wally West be a completely different character with a completely different background and a completely different, like, ethnicity. And then they couldn't even fix it by being like, oh, this is just an alternate universe Wally West, or a different Wally West, or this is literally the same Wally West from the TV show. Like, no, it's like, they did it in the worst way possible when they brought back actual ginger, redheaded Wally West. And it sucked. And now we have two Wally Wests running around in the DC universe, both going by Kid Flash or The Flash, or I don't actually know where it stands on that now. Like there's a lot of problems with the way that Marvel and DC have handled legacy heroes that I'm against, which is increasingly frustrating because the best legacy hero comes from DC and it's literally their first attempt at a legacy hero, Dick Grayson. Like they did it right with Dick Grayson. And then they just never did it that way again. And I don't know why. So I think it's a lot easier now to just pick up a DC comic and just enjoy it for what it is. Like, I haven't actually read a new Batman comic since Tom King. Well, no. I read the one that Bendis did. And I did read the first few issues of Starsky's Batman run. And I wasn't a fan. So I dropped it. But that was the last time I read like a Batman comic. I'm enjoying the hell out of the current Batgirl run. Batgirl 2024 is fucking peak. Like, it's one of my favorite. It's quickly turning into one of my favorite comic books of all time. But I will say this in Marvel's favor. Marvel is a lot better at having soft endings and offboarding points. Like, if you're into Captain America and you want to start with like the 40s, or start with a. Actually, if you want to get into Captain America, I would suggest actually just starting with the 60s with Tales of Suspense when he gets reintroduced there. Or start with Avengers number 4, because like anything that is of value from the 40s, you kind of already know, and you will be reintroduced to throughout Tales of Suspense, which does like updated versions of those same stories from the 40s. Uh, so I would start there, and then if you want to stop when he dies against Onslaught, you can stop there. Like you don't have to read going forward. I suggest you should, because after that you got Volume 3, which is really good. I gotta really blow my nose now. Hold on. But yeah, you could go straight from, but you could also stop with Volume 3. Like I said, the Death of Captain America in issue 50 of Volume 3 by Dan Jurgens. You can stop there. You can stop when Captain America dies at the end of Civil War. Like you can stop there. You can stop when he loses his powers and hands the shield over to Sam Wilson. You can stop there. Like Marvel gives its readers plenty of offboarding points when it comes to each of their characters, and if you want to keep going, you can. I suggest stopping. Like I suggest stopping Captain America. I would suggest ending it off with the Brubaker run. Like don't read anything after the Brubaker run if you want to get off that train. Uh, and then for Spider Man, I would suggest again stopping at 1990. For the X Men, I would suggest stopping sometime in the 90s. Like stop before um what is that storyline? The storyline where Magneto rips the adamantium out of Wolverine's skeleton. Stop before we get there. Because that was total character assassination for Magneto. Like Chris Claremont had spent so much of his run developing Magneto and giving him like a very slow, gradual, cathartic face turn and making him into a hero and making him into like a member and leader of the X Men. And then the person who followed Claremont up was like, "Hey, Magneto's like a noteworthy X Men villain. I'm gonna make him the villain again." It's like, but why? You're not giving him a reason to. You're just making him evil again because you want to. It doesn't make any sense at this point. Uh, And then from there, like if you like, obviously, if you stop in the '90s with X Men, you wouldn't get to X-23, which is a shame because X-23 is a great character. Laura Kinney is a great addition to the X Men family, but none of the storylines she's in the comics are good. She's only really good in the Logan movie and X Men Evolution. Uh, I am not a fan of any of the 2000s X Men comics, and the 2010s X Men comics are basically fucking unreadable. Like the Krakoa era fucking sucks, and Bendis's run on X Men sucks. Like it's none of it's good. House of X, Power of X, it's all bad. It's all bad. It's all downhill from there. For the Avengers, I would suggest reading like the ending with like the Kurt Busiek run from the 2000s. Uh, like stop right before I get to disassembled. Uh, what else? Superman. You can start with Death of Superman. In Reign of the Superman. I think that's a good like offboarding point, but like it's not as good of an offboarding point as a lot of stuff from Marvel. There is no good offboarding point for Batman. It just is none of it ever amounts to like a satisfying conclusion. No matter how long Batman is gone, he's never been given like a satisfying like, you know what? I could stop here and be totally satisfied with where all the characters are at. The closest, like maybe at the end of No Man's Land, was like we're rebuilding Gotham now. Welcome to the team, Cassandra Cain. We're gonna just keep doing our thing here, and nothing bad's gonna happen, and whatever. and I've been mostly focusing on like Marvel and DC on the comic side of things because like I feel like that's the more interesting thing to talk about with this discussion because like what am I going to say about manga like oh it doesn't have any of these problems. Like, it doesn't have the interconnected problem. It doesn't have the issue of like, oh, if you want to keep up with Captain America, you have to read Captain America and also the Avengers, and also make sure to read his appearance in Daredevil Born Again. Oh, you want to know what's going on with Daredevil Born Again? You better start reading Daredevil from issue number 1 onward. Uh, oh, hey, look, it's Spider Man. He shows up every now and then. Better start reading Spider Man. Oh, Spider Man number 1 features the Fantastic Four. Oh, better start reading the Fantastic Four. Nick Fury is a major player in the Captain America comics. Better read Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos by Jim Steranko. That's actually an honest to God comic recommendation. Please read Nick Fury by Jim Steranko. It's great. Uh, but like that's always been part of Marvel's problem. DC segregates its heroes a lot more. I have a couple like little bullet points for a perspective like a Marvel versus DC thing because I do think that even though they shared a lot of the same talent and share a lot of the same issues, there's a different vibe with them. Like Justice League is the All Stars, Avengers is the Losers Club. Uh, Avengers has Avengers villains: Ultron, Thanos, Kang, the Masters of Evil. Who are some other ones? Living Laser. I don't know why he's the one that came to mind. Uh, but like the Justice League has no villains. The Justice League has a bunch of Superman villains with armies. Like Darkseid is not a Justice League villain. He's a villain for the New Gods, and the New Gods were created by Jack Kirby at a time when Jack Kirby was also reading Superman, which is why Superman and the New Gods teamed up so often against Darkseid, which then related Darkseid to Superman and made Darkseid into a Superman villain, which is why he shows up in Superman the Animated Series so often. But then it's like he gets beat by Superman in that same cartoon, so when he comes back in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, it's like, it's still Darkseid versus Superman, and then Darkseid's army versus the rest of the Justice League. Same thing with like the White Martians. The White Martians are a Martian Manhunter villain. You get an army of them, and suddenly they're a Justice League villain. Uh, Brainiac with like DC Universe Online, Injustice 2, the Fire in the Sky storyline. Brainiac is just a Superman villain. You give him an army, then they're a Justice League villain. One of the lesser stated things is that people in DC are generally good. People in Marvel suck. Like DC has to like have brainwashing and armies of robots in order to give the hero teams an army of disposable henchmen. People in Marvel just fucking suck. Like they're super racist, super bigot. Like the world in Marvel is not as worth saving. Like they treat their heroes like dog shit. And even like their heroes are all like much more generally flawed people than their DC equivalents. Uh, Both have done like one of the bullet points people have said in manga's favor is that it's not as political. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there are plenty of manga that are super woke, just as woke as like anything from Marvel or DC. I think Marvel and DC are a lot worse at implementing that. Marvel especially, and it's very blatant. Like DC does a lot of like throw shit at the ceiling and see what sticks. They'll retcon things like sexuality and stuff to throw more shit onto the ceiling, which is why you get shit like Tim Drake starting to dumping Stephanie Brown for Bernard, or Alan Scott getting retconned as gay, even though he's literally from the 40s and had like a long term girlfriend. That's another like little hilarious little tidbit of Batman trivia is that there were so many jokes about Batman and Robin that they literally created Catherine Kane to become Batwoman in order to give Batman a love interest who was a woman and who could like be part of the main cast, and then like she just stopped existing and never came back, but she did as Batman's cousin who is a lesbian. Kate has a very funny publishing history that's so much more entertaining than any comic she's ever been in. But that was like part of the reason why they invented Batwoman and Batgirl was to give like, hey, Batgirl could be a love interest for Robin, Batwoman could be a love interest for Batman. No gay subtext for Batman and Robin at all now, right? That's just kind of like part of product of its time. Uh, with Batman especially, like they did not future proof comics back in the day because they kind of just traded cheap disposable entertainment, which valid. They had no way of knowing how culturally ubiquitous these superheroes would end up being. But like the idea of billionaires having wards, like just taking young children, taking them into their home as like a servant and as like a an heir for like a bachelor for someone who doesn't have kids, something like that, was something that like billionaires did back in the day that they just don't do anymore and they haven't done since like the 1940s. So by the time Robin was getting popular, the whole impetus behind his storyline was already becoming like a dated idea that just doesn't happen anymore. Which is why, like, if I were to just do a full blown reboot of Batman, I would actually turn Wayne Manor and DC. If you're watching this, I'm available. Hire me. I can have some ideas for Batman reboots and Batman shows. Like I would love to be on that writer's staff. I'm not above selling out to comic book companies. uh, but my idea would be to have Wayne Manor straight up be an orphanage. Like Bruce Wayne comes back to Gotham and he turns Wayne Manor into an orphanage, and he doesn't like purposely do it to recruit Robins from the staff, but like I would have Dick Grayson be an orphan who joins that staff, and then have him like kind of like find out that Bruce Wayne is also Batman. Kind of like maybe do a little bit of Tim Drake stuff there. Or like he figures out the identity, be like, hey, you need someone to watch your back, yada yada yada. I need this, blah 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 blah. And have Dick Grayson be the one that convinces Batman to let him be Robin. Uh, and then have that be kind of like a common occurrence. Like Jason Todd also ends up there. Tim Drake, he comes from he's his part of his backstory is that he's rich, that he's like in the same neighborhood as Bruce Wayne, that the Drakes and the Waynes were friends. So you can have Tim Drake be someone who like volunteers as a high schooler to help out at this orphanage, and then he becomes Robin through there. Stephanie Brown can be there while her dad's in prison. The Cassandra Cain would totally fit into that. Barbara Gordon could be another person who like volunteers there. Like have that kind of be, because I think it would just make more sense to me than having Bruce Wayne either have wards, which is, again, that's just not something people do anymore, or just straight up adopt. That I don't feel like he would. At least not right out the gate. Like he would eventually. I can see him doing it eventually, but not like right out the gate. I think having him like run an orphanage and have Robin come from that orphanage would be a good like modern update, retelling, reimagining, revamp for a potential Batman either reboot, comic, or adaptation. I think that would be a neat, interesting twist or spin that you could put on the Batman mythos that would both fix some of the jokes that come from the whole Batman Robin situation, while also like differentiating itself from the likes of Young Justice or the movies. Because you want to differentiate yourself. You know, you don't want to just rehash the same stories over and over and over again. Like sometimes you kind of have to for a certain bit, but yeah, just do something different. I think that would be different and cool. What else do I want to say? I got plenty of time, but don't have a whole lot of other notes to go through. Oh, the point I was making about the progressive politics, uh, is mostly just that Marvel's a lot worse at it. Like Marvel is more like they're more defensive about it. I feel, and they're way more like Miles Morales will always be a divisive character because he was made under false pretenses. Like, no matter how good Miles Morales gets, no matter how good of a story he could be in, no matter how good his movies are, which I think the Spider Verse movies are very overrated. I think they're the most overrated thing Spider Man has ever been attached to. But no matter how good you think those movies are, no matter how good you think those games are, none of it will ever change the fact that the only reason Miles Morales exists is because Steve Ditko was in a lawsuit with Marvel. Because Marvel fucked Steve Ditko out of royalty revenue. They fucked him out of his creative compensation. They fucked him out of rights. They fucked him for decades upon decades. He left Marvel on very bad terms because of the way they were treating him, and he threatened to take his creations away and get the rights to them. And so Marvel created Miles Morales as a backup, just in case Steve Ditko won. And they did the same thing around that same time with a lot of characters. Because Jack Kirby, the Kirby estate, not Jack Kirby himself, he was already dead, but the Kirby estate was also threatening to do the same thing with Captain America, which is why Captain America got depowered and had his shield taken by Sam Wilson. They were threatening to do the same thing with the Hulk, which is when you had the Chinese guy become the Hulk. They were threatening to do the same thing with Captain Marvel, which is why Carol Danvers became Captain Marvel and why Kamala Khan became Miss Marvel. They were threatening to do the same thing with Wolverine, which is when Laura Kinney became Wolverine. Like, there's a lot of lawsuits that are getting thrown at Marvel over the way that they treated their artists because Marvel has a very long bad history of treating their artists like garbage. Like, they've been doing it since the 60s, and they still do it to this day, as far as I'm aware. DC has always been much more creator friendly, and part of that's been part of the issue. Like, the DC kind of being too creator friendly, too artist friendly, too like, do whatever you want, who cares? Causes a lot of those same continuity issues I talked about earlier. But, like, a lot more people will have had like falling outs with Marvel and then gone to DC. I haven't really heard any case where people had a falling out with DC and then went to Marvel. Like, as far as I know, by the end of his life, Jack Kirby, who had worked off and on with both companies for decades, like he started with Timely Comics, then he fought in World War II, then he went to DC, then he went back to Marvel, then he went back to DC, back to Marvel again, back to DC again, and by the end of his life, he had a horrible relationship with the people at Marvel and a still pretty good relationship with the people at DC. Uh, when you look at all the people who are working on DC Comics now, Matt Fraction, uh, Brian Michael Bendis, uh, Chip Starsky, these are people who made a name for themselves at Marvel had a falling out with Marvel. Jim Lee, the president of DC, started off again as a Marvel artist who had a really shitty time, was fucked over, was not giving adequate compensation for the work he was putting in to one of the best visually looking X-Men comics ever printed to this day, and one of the best-selling comic book issues ever made is X-Men #1, the '90s relaunch by Chris Claremont and Jim Lee. Jim Lee did not feel like he was treated fairly, so he broke things off with Marvel, went to Image, and then still fostered a decent, healthy relationship with DC that eventually led to him becoming president of DC. Todd McFarlane is another one. He made his bread and butter at Marvel. Like, he made a name for himself at Marvel. He drew Spider-Man. He created Venom. He's the guy who designed Venom. And he's never gone back to Marvel. He quit Marvel, he founded Image Comics, and he mostly makes toys now. Like, he's primarily a toy manufacturer, but he'll still draw like variant covers for Batman or Superman or whatever. And I think he's drawn like maybe a few variant comics for Spider-Man because he is still like admittedly a fan of Spider-Man, and he still like has a lot of fond memories of the creative fulfillment he had helping write Spider-Man and getting his own Spider-Man book with adjectiveless Spider-Man in the early '90s before he went to Image. But like, he's not on the best terms with them. And a lot of people, like, I know of a lot more writers and artists that feel the same way. Brubaker, Starsky, all these people. Uh, like, DC creates new characters in order to, like, sell new action figures. Marvel creates new characters to fuck old creators out of the rights to their characters. Like, oh, Ditko wants a pay raise for the work he did on Spider-Man. He wants more revenue for residuals. Well, fuck him. We're gonna sabotage Spider-Man's books and replace him with Miles Morales, a character he doesn't own and doesn't get any royalties for. Even though Miles Morales has a near identical costume to the one Steve Ditko created for Spider-Man in the first place. The Ditko estate will never see a dime from those Spider-Verse movies, despite him being like the creator or co-creator, depending on who you ask, of Spider-Man. Yeah, I'm not very happy with Marvel over the past like 10 years, if you can't tell. And I used to be a DC hater. Like, I used to slander the hell out of DC. I was one of those people when I was in middle school. I would like go on message forums and stuff, and I would be like, I was one of the people bitching about like Cassandra Cain's character assassination and Robin 1 year later. I'd be like, oh, the DC doesn't really care about their characters, blah, blah, blah. Like, I would be one of those angry fanboys, and I wouldn't even be like reading those comics. I did read Robin 1 year later, but I read it well after the fact. Uh, and I did just to see how it actually panned out. Uh, just to see how bad it was. And it was bad. It was really bad. But again, that writer apologized for it and took it upon himself to like figure out a way to not retcon it out of existence, but like explain it away that, oh, mind control. And the new writer, Tom Bromble, 2020, the Batgirl 2024, he's actually extrapolated on that, being like, hey, Cassandra Cain was actually being manipulated, brainwashed since she was like a baby. And she like temporarily broke free of her brainwashing, ran away from home, and then that's when she like became Batgirl and stuff. Uh, but like, so it wasn't like they took her and then started brainwashing her. No, they just reestablished the brainwash link they already had on her, and that's why it worked so quickly, as quickly as it did, and it took years to kind of undo that. She kind of went through her own Winter Soldier and Wakanda storyline, where she has to like undo all the damage that the League of Assassins did to her uh, mental faculties in order to become like a functioning person. Uh, but yeah, I was a DC slanderer for a long time. And now I'm a Marvel slander. Like, I used to be so much more of a Marvel fan for so long. Well, I can't really say for so long. I was a Captain America and Spider-Man fan for so long. I didn't get into like the wider Marvel universe until around the time the Civil War was going on. Even though I read Civil War years and years later, like I read that when I was in high school. Years after it was concluded. Uh, but like I caught up. Like I read those encyclopedias. Like I said before, I read those like character bios and wikis and stuff to kind of like catch up. And then I started reading what was coming out at that time. And then right as I was catching up with Marvel, that's when Marvel started going down the tubes, and I stopped enjoying it almost immediately. And I stopped enjoying like Marvel and DC for a while, but I'm kind of like back on board with DC. And again, a lot of it's because like if I don't like something, I can just ignore it. I can just pretend that Tom King's Batman doesn't exist. I can just pretend that Brian Michael Bendis didn't age up John Kent because he didn't want to write Superman as a dad. I can just ignore that. I can just pretend it doesn't happen. In my mind, in my head canon, John Kent is still a little kid, and he is still Super Sons with Damian Wayne. And they are both better for it. I can just ignore that. Uh, but that's gonna do it for me tonight. I've been going for about an hour and a half, which is about how long I wanted to go for. Thank you all for indulging me on this. Uh, Let me know what you think about this whole debate. Sorry, I didn't really get into detail about the manga side of things, but like I said, like there's not really anything else to say other than just it's more easy to access and easier to follow and just easier to get into and keep up with. Uh, Coming out weekly also helps. Like it's hard, at least for me. Like it's actually hard to kind of keep up with things that come out monthly. Whereas things that come out weekly, I'm kind of like I'm able to get in a rhythm. Like okay, every Friday new One Piece, every Friday new Naki Nagi, every Friday new Naruto. Back when Naruto was still around. Whereas like this, like okay, when's the next Batgirl issue coming out? I'm not caught up with Batgirl 2024, but like when I do catch up, like when is the next one coming out? I'm not gonna really know. Then I'm gonna have to spend $4 on each issue. Like, I don't know. Kind of seems like a lot of work and a lot of money for not a lot of story. Uh, but yeah, that's gonna do it for me. Next week, we'll catch up on all the stuff going. Actually, next week, uh, I was originally for this live show planning on doing my Batman the Animated Series list, but then they changed my schedule again to where I'm off on Tuesdays again instead of Fridays. So next week I'm going to try to have next week it's Batman the Animated Series. We're gonna do the Batman the Animated Series rankings next week. So try to hold me to that, and I'll try to keep myself